Hi, I'm John DeVore. Welcome to the channel. Today, I believe that Roxy will not make an appearance. She refuses to participate in a video with such a clickbait title. But the title is what I wanted to talk about. And this is something that definitely affects me. I own a lot of Mobile Fidelity records. These were not gifted to me, that I paid for them. I am definitely a record collector, a connoisseur of vinyl, let's say. And I have MoFi records going back to the 80s. And I love almost all of them. They're great records, including a bunch of the recent one-steps. These are very expensive records, which is not really any new thing in high-end audiophile vinyl, to be frank. And these are certainly not the most expensive records one can buy out there in the market. They are, in most cases, my favorite pressings. They're my favorite versions. The Marvin is my favorite version of all the ones that I have. The Mingus is, the Monk Stream is, the Santana Abraxas is. These are the best sounding versions. In my collection, they are the best sounding versions of these records. So if I could get a redo and go back in time, knowing that there is a digital step in the one-step records, would I still pay over $100 for each one of these? I think I would, because the end result for me is, what is the sound of this record? Is it the best sounding version of this particular record that I can get? So, and the answer is, in almost all of these cases, yes. So I think I would still own the same number of Mobile Fidelity records that I own now. It seems to me that the consumers that this scandal is going to affect the most are not the consumers who are buying them to listen to them. It seems to me that the people who are getting hit the hardest by this scandal are the speculators. The speculators who buy as many sealed copies as they can and then resell them on the secondary market at a huge markup. Those guys are going to get fucked. But you know what? Those are the guys who are taking the risk. Those are the guys who essentially drive up the price for everyone else. Those are the guys who fuck up the markets for art. They're the guys who fuck up the markets for watches. Those are the guys who have essentially ensured that I will never own a Rolex Daytona, not because I don't covet a Rolex Daytona, but because I will never be able to afford a Rolex Daytona. It kind of comes with the territory. If you're going to speculate on something, you are going to take the risk that it is not going to go up in value, and then you are going to take the hit. I would say the biggest losers in this whole thing are the guys at Mobile Fidelity Sound Lab. That is a fire that I don't know how they're going to put out. It is maybe the most brutal example of needing to do damage control that I have seen in the hi-fi industry, and I'm not sure what they're going to do. My hope is that maybe it brings it back to more of its roots. This is a company that really has a long history, really long history, decades and decades, and they have always put out fantastic sounding records all the way back to the beginning. But in the beginning, they were steered and guided by brilliant engineers like Stan Ricker and like Tim DePeravicini. And these are guys whose names they still throw around a lot to this day. But the company itself is owned by a big marketing company. They are owned by a company that also owns essentially what is, if not the largest, then one of the largest high-end audio retailers on the planet. So yeah, there's certainly a sense, at least to me, that change of ownership has guided their decisions over the years, the recent years. And maybe they have made some missteps instead of one-steps. Ooh. And I have to say, I would have to agree with most of the commentators out there that they have been very misleading. I am sure that it is more difficult and probably more expensive to make a record in using the one-step process, essentially eliminating the mother and father steps of the mastering chain. It's got to be more difficult, and it's almost certainly got to be more expensive to make records that way. However, by adding this unmentioned secret digital step into the chain, they have fundamentally changed from what was an implicitly very limited production process. There's only a certain number of times you could run the original analog master tape. Every single time you run that tape, you run the risk of it breaking. You will degrade it to some extent. So by eliminating that element of this limited production chain, you have essentially removed any actual limitations to the number of these one-step records you can make. And I think they showed their hand when they announced that they were making 40,000 of the Michael Jackson records. Am I going to keep my pre-order of the Michael Jackson Thriller record in place? Yes. I am pretty sure it's going to be the best sounding Thriller available. And that is a landmark, very important record, the Quincy Jones Michael Jackson record. So yeah, I'm going to keep my order in there. And I will be very happy when it arrives, and it'll almost certainly be incredible sounding. Thank you, Roxy, for supporting me in my endeavors. I appreciate it. And I do just want to mention that I think the other people that this is going to hurt a lot is going to be the record stores that bought inventory, because all of a sudden these records are going to be much harder to sell. These records were pre-selling out, I think, their entire runs. You know, the Marvin Gaye was 7,500. I think that was sold out before they started shipping the first records. So clearly market forces were speaking before the scandal, and market forces are going to speak post-scandal, and they're going to make market corrections. I think Mobile Fidelity is probably in trouble. You know, the idea that they've probably committed or maybe already printed 40,000 of the Thrillers, and my guess is that it's not going to be that easy to sell 40,000 records at $125 a pop now that Sunlight has been shown on their mastering chain. Again, it doesn't mean that mastering chain isn't awesome sounding, because in my experience, it is. The other thing I wanted to talk about that I don't really hear anyone talking about is this whole idea of digital versus analog, and I think it's pretty clear that anyone who watches this channel and that I'm an analog guy. I love the sound of records. There's no question in my mind that the best sounding vinyl playback will beat the best sounding digital playback. There are millions of people out there who will disagree with me. No problem with that. If you want to argue that your DCS stack sounds better than your Rega turntable, I'm not going to argue with that. I'm sure it does, and I probably would agree with you. But that's not the comparison that I want to make. And even if we push that aside, there's this whole idea of these sort of hybrid formats. You know, there's a lot of records. There's a lot of great records out there that were recorded in digital. And the vinyl versions of those digital recordings often are the best sounding. And I'm not the only one to point this out. And whether or not that's because the CD releases ended up getting really compressed and the vinyl releases ended up not, or whether or not there's some magic to vinyl playback itself that is adding some special sauce to what we end up hearing, you know, that seems to me to be maybe part of what's happening here. I have done back-to-back-to-back comparisons of DSD files played back on a very good rig to the vinyl of that same record to very high-end 15 IPS tape of that very same record. And all three sound awesome. They all three sound really different. And to me, more often than not, the vinyl would be the one that I would choose. The vinyl, for some reason, seems to paint a more solid, palpable, believable sonic picture of what's going on in the soundstage there. for whatever reason. I don't know what the reason is. Analog tape has strengths that the vinyl doesn't have. Analog tape has this sort of sheer unlimited dynamic capability in the high end, where I feel like vinyl playback has some limitations. And I also feel like analog tape has a more relentless, unstoppable temporal pace. There's a unflappable kind of momentum to analog tape that I feel like no other format has. And then for me, the highest strength of digital playback is, maybe more than anything, there's a peace of mind to it. This idea that digital file is yours forever. It's never going to change. You can play it back an infinite number of times and not break anything and not wear anything out. You're not wearing out any styluses. You're not wearing out tape heads. You're not wearing out the magnetic particles on the tape itself. You're not adding to groove wear. There's a peace of mind to a digital file that doesn't exist on any other format. And there's no denying that either. The other thing that is sort of amazing to me is the fact that these MoFi one-steps that are cut from DSD masters sound better than the DSD digital releases mastered from presumably the exact same file. They sound better, in my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of people. I am obviously not talking to the troll bots on the forums that are now "I told you so" and all that kind of shit. You know, those guys, those are like abused dogs in a house, and you're walking past the house and they're barking their brains out. You know, what do you do when you're walking past a house like that? You can stop and just cause that dog to essentially bark itself to death, or you can just keep walking and ignore it. But for me, it's undeniable that these one-step records sound better than the direct DSD. Even though we're essentially moving away from digital and then reformatting it into a record. It doesn't make sense that they would sound better, but in my opinion, they do. It's kind of like the audiophile reel-to-reel tape market, where there's no question in my mind that there are sellers of what are being claimed to be dubs of safety copies of masters of legendary albums for sale online. These are guys who are selling very high quality 15 IPS reel-to-reel tapes that are claimed to be dubs of something very close to an original master reel-to-reel tape. And my sense of it is that probably most of those that are being sold online are from high quality digital. And they probably still sound better in a lot of ways than just playing that digital file. It doesn't make sense to me. It's not logical, but it is kind of what ends up happening. So what this is doing is it's kind of shining a light on what is maybe a little bit of an embarrassing high-end audio secret. And that is, in a lot of cases, what is best sounding is maybe not what is most perfect. If a vinyl record pressed from a DSD file sounds better than that DSD file played back directly, that's kind of weird. And it certainly seems to, on its surface, defy logic. And yet, it's the case for me, and it's the case for a lot of people out there. I know Michael Fremer has discussed this a lot of times. So yeah, it's a little bit of an embarrassing and awkward detail there, but it doesn't embarrass me. It's not going to stop me from listening to and loving my digitally sourced analog media. If it makes a lot of amazing sounding records more affordable, that's a plus. If it makes Mobile Fidelity Sound Labs more transparent, that's a plus. And hell, I mean, maybe MoFi is going to have to re-examine its marketing strategy and go back to making full all analog records again. Maybe those will be their premium offerings, and maybe their DSD sourced records will come down in price. I don't know. That would be a nice outcome as well. Anyway, that's my 2 cents, or 50 cents, or I don't know, with inflation these days. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you liked the video, And I'll see you at the next one. Bye.